Hello, welcome to Mutually Assured Conversation. I'm here with Sam from GreenerSideOfSam. Today we're going to talk about Kafka. But yeah, I guess, Sam, do you want to give an introduction to yourself and say any plugs that you want to give?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Samantha Green, and I have a YouTube channel called GreenerSideOfSam. I like to write poetry and do videos on that on my channel. I also like to do book interpretations, some of them being Kafka, which we're going to talk about today. So thank you so much for having me on.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for joining. So if you were transformed into an insect, which one do you think you'd be?
Oh gosh. I love that question. I think a grasshopper.
Why grasshopper?
Because no, not a grasshopper. I was thinking of the wrong one. Praying mantis.
Okay. Okay.
Because one, they're green and they can blend in with their surroundings.
Right. And I'm pretty sure the female praying mantis kills the male after she's mated with it as well.
Yes, I wasn't thinking about that, but yes, that is true.
Cool. So yeah, so I want to talk about Kafka today because you've got some really good analysis videos on YouTube. I'm kind of suggest people go over and watch those because I feel like with Kafka, it's there's obviously the surface level story which makes Kafka really good because you can kind of 2D summarize the substantive aspects of the story to someone really quickly. Like with the metamorphosis, you can say, guy gets transformed into bug, issues with the family, the end, right? But
there was an apple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But all kind of great literature, I feel like it has varying levels of depth. So it has that really basic level, and obviously most of Kafka's writings are very short. But it's kind of like a prism because it has like a real depth to it. And when you read it yourself the first time, you kind of get one perspective. And then one of the great things about, and you can tell it's great literature when, for example, you can stumble across analysis videos on YouTube and someone gives you a completely different perspective you never would have kind of got from it. So I'm just kind of wondering, kind of what is your take on the metamorphosis?
Well, I want to first say that I look at this from a very feminine, intrinsic point of view. So I don't like to go and look at other interpretations first before I read it. I always like to have my own interpretation. So a lot of it is derived from things that I have experienced in my life and was trying to put a meaning to. When I read the Metamorphosis, I actually read through it twice. The first time I just kind of read it to get the baseline story. And then the second time I went through it again and I tried to read it with a deeper meaning. And what I came up with was and the way I came up with this was actually something had happened to me years previously. I usually, I don't know why, but I have this face where people want to come up to me and tell me their life story. And I'm like, okay. But I met this man in the store one day and he was like, yeah, I was just diagnosed with cancer and I have nobody and I don't know what to do. And I just kind of sat there and I listened to him. And when I read through the Metamorphosis, that was the very first thing I thought of. So the way I interpreted it was you go through a change where you're not going to come back from, and your life is going to be changed forever. Where when you were previously able to take care of others, now those people have to take care of you. And it points to a lot of what happens in real life today. It points to things like the cycle of being in a nursing home, because a lot of people will, especially in the West, not so much in the eastern parts of the world, but in the western parts of the world, a lot of people will be like, well, I have work, I can't take care of grandma anymore. And so they just kind of they and it's nothing that we mean to do. It's just a part of the culture where people when they lose use, they kind of become like bugs. And so you can also see this in a lot of the time, if say a woman has cancer and is married, a doctor will sit her down and tell her to prepare for being alone. I'm sorry, this is already getting really dark. The doctor will tell a married woman that she has to prepare to be alone, because a lot of the divorce rates are very, very high for women who get cancer. And there was one more thing. I might have to come back to it later, but so basically how I interpreted it was, you go through this major change in your life, like you're in an accident or something, and now you're paralyzed from like the neck down, and you cannot take care of yourself. And the people that you were taking care of before now have to take care of you. And so I think the underlying message that he was trying to say, and this is what's brilliant about Kafka, is he doesn't really tell you outright what the message is, because it's so surreal, and so people can have so many different interpretations. But what I got from it was that we need to find people who are going to be willing to lay down their lives for us, and vice versa. Because if we don't, then we're going to keep living through the cycle of having to have nursing homes and things like that, where people are just kind of dropped off and left. And it's a very, very sad thing. But I think this story points to kind of an answer or a hope, a light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think, just to rewind a little bit, I liked what you said about not kind of looking for other analysis or kind of knowing what going into it. I mean, I read more philosophy generally speaking, but I've in recent years, I always skip like the introduction or preface pretty much, unless it's written by the author themselves. I feel like you end up regurgitating other opinions and things like that and readings. You're more likely to do that. I think most of the things we say are actually us regurgitating stuff, but you're even more unlikely to actually get at the core of something or what you think about something if you read something like that. So I don't know, random piece of advice: anyone who reads philosophy or like fiction, just skip the introduction. never read it. But I think something that stuck out to me. Exactly, yeah. I think something that really stuck out to me in your analysis was the difference between Gregor's sister and Gregor's mother. The sort of I guess for lack of a better word, I guess I don't know what I would call it that you're talking about other than unconditional love, right? And that is basically saying that, you know, is loving someone or something, even though I think your words were, it's not what it once was. And I think that is a perfect encapsulation of the thing that's kind of subterranean in the metamorphosis. And, you know, you mentioned that it's kind of like a gory, like weird sort of horror story in a way. I kind of like the ambiguity of the language Kafka uses in the original, at least, because it's not really clear about whether he's talking about a vermin or a bug or whatever. But I think that kind of leans into the fact that that's actually kind of unimportant in a way. And the point was that, you know, even though this on the surface of it seems like a very dark and gruesome tale of various sorts, it does say something about that, you know, that unconditional love that people often, you know, talk about in very sort of fluffy words. But, you know, it is, in a way, it is like when you talk about death, like it is kind of a gruesome thing, because that unconditional love has, you know, all the fuzzy cozies of like romantic love and, you know, family love and all that sort of stuff. But it also has the fact that, in a sense, you're willing to die for this thing or person. And as you said yourself, we live in a very instrumentalized time. And I feel like this is what the issue with the way Gregor's mother sees things is, that this person is no longer instrumental to them. So they just completely jettison that conditional love they would have. Is, you know, it's still love, but it's conditional on certain things. I don't know if that makes sense or that jives with your.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And with a sister, and you were talking about unconditional love. Um, Unconditional love is not that fluffy sort of feeling. In the book, a lot of the time, she's like, I can't even look at my brother because just he's so grotesque, and so she just like. It's actually told in a very funny way. She takes the plate and she just kind of like pushes it like in the room, like, here you go. And and even the sister, even though she chooses to lay down her life for him in a sense, even towards the end of his life, she becomes very apathetic because it's because she becomes very tired, and that's what happens to a lot of people, that at the very end they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm just so exhausted for caring for this person. And at the end of the story, there's actually a sense of relief in the sister, which I think is a very human thing. It's like you've spent all your time taking care of somebody that you love, and it wasn't a fluffy sort of time where they could reciprocate back to you. So there is a sense of relief in that.
Mhm. Yeah, I suppose you mentioned the kind of circle of life that's happening regardless of what society we live in, right? Whether it's modern West or whether it's Eastern societies or whatever, medieval times or whatever, is that circle of life is going to happen regardless. And I suppose the important thing is kind of how you approach that. And it's quite interesting how, again, in a weird way, we're talking about a man transforming into a large bug or whatever. But like you said, that sort of disgust sensitivity that even the sort of loving sister feels is almost akin to kind of when someone's got dementia or something, the annoyance family members feel, the frustration they feel, or, when someone kind of loses their mind or something. And again, there is that sort of that disgust sensitivity that gets kicked off. And I suppose the real kind of meaning behind the story is that even though there is a tiredness, there is a sort of frustration, and there's a loss of that instrumentality, that utilitarian aspect, that regardless of all of that, they're still I think the language uses people in your corner, right?
People in your corner, yes.
Yeah.
Who's in your corner? And it's usually only like one or two people
Yeah.
find out. And what's interesting is that the people you think are in your corner before the incident happens end up not being the people in your corner. It ends up being somebody else sometimes. And that's difficult too. I also like how the story, I noticed it kind of showed the dimensions of different types of care. So you had the sister who just kind of laid down everything. You had the mother who still cared because, like, if you remember, she was behind the door like, my son, but she was unwilling to do anything about it. Like, she was just kind of hysterical, like, he's not the same anymore. And then you got the dad who's just kind of like, this is not my son anymore. Like, I'm going to throw an apple at it.
Okay, I've got a story. I've got a story for you.
Okay.
A story for you. Okay, have you ever been to the Kafka Museum in Prague?
I have not. I would love to go.
Yeah, I've been super lucky because I've been able to go. And it's kind of like, it's in a part of the city that's been preserved from like Kafka's time. It's not in the part that he lived, but it kind of gives you a good idea of it. And it is it's really quite a beautiful building. It's kind of like an old warehouse / farmhouse thing with a big courtyard and this sort of stuff. And so I was there, and it's a bit of a maze, to be honest with you. So I went over to the entrance, or where it said, "This is the Kafka Museum, come in here," sort of thing. And I get this absolutely deadpan, like Central European person working there, who's just like, "Oh yeah, this is the entrance, but you have to go to the ticket office to buy a ticket." And I was like, "Okay, all right." And I was like, "Where is it?" It's back through the courtyard. It's back through the courtyard. So I go back through the courtyard, and I see one of the other wings is like it has like a little cashier's desk in it. So I was like, okay, this must be the ticket office. So I go in there because there's like, it looks like somewhere where you pay for something, right? So I go and ask the person there, and they're also like, oh no, this isn't the ticket office. this is the gift shop. You have to go out into the courtyard and to the other way to find the ticket office. And eventually, I kind of like walk around in circles a little bit. And yeah, eventually I find this really like small booth, and I don't know if there's anyone in there or anything, but you know, eventually I notice there's someone in there kind of hunched over doing something on their phone or whatever. So I knock there, and you know, this person who clearly didn't want to be working there rolled their eyes at me and gave me a ticket. And eventually I got into the Kafka Museum. I was allowed to go into the Kafka Museum. But what amazes me is that there was, and to this day, I don't know if that was like a deliberate part of the experience, or whether you know, no one was aware of it on the level I was, where it was just completely deadpan, just telling me this is where you have to go. But I thought it was kind of beautiful that, you know, to get into the Kafka Museum, you have to go through a very Kafkaesque experience. I feel like I went through the castle myself in a way.
Yes. I've only read halfway through the castle so far, but I have the basic idea of it. But so I know what you're talking about, and it's so funny because so many instances in life you feel like you're in a Kafka story like that, and maybe those people didn't even mean to do that to you. They just didn't know what they were doing, or they were apathetic and didn't care. One of the bigger stories that I read of his was The Trial. Yeah. And that one took me months to get through and really get a good interpretation of it. And that one is very, I mean, they're all very surreal, but that one, he really doesn't give you a good message outright. You have to really think about what, more of like the process of what's going on in the story. Like, what happened because of this and what happened because of that. And it's a lot of layers. And finally, what I came to was that in order to stay in power, people will kind of throw each other under the bus. And like I said, I look at this in a very feminine, intrinsic way. And so and I'm not saying all women act like this, but in a lot of instances. So I'm going to give you an example. So we're in a classroom, and there's like a bunch of girls in this classroom, and one girl, she's a little bit odd, but she's not doing anything wrong per se. But the other girls, because they don't want to be perceived as weird, they start talking about this girl. And they're like, this girl is so weird. She's doing things all wrong. Like, she's sitting in her chair strange. And so they kind of have power over that girl. It doesn't mean that girl was doing anything wrong, but now these other girls have power over that girl. And eventually they kind of start picking off on each other one by one, until you've got this head honcho girl who's like got the power. And I think I used in the example as well. You also, like, you'll have people in authority who want to keep that power. So you have a teacher, and the teacher says to the girl, like, you can't sit like that. You can't sit with, or you can't stand on your chair or whatever. And so people listen because the teacher's in authority, or of authority. And so class gets out, and then that same girl who got reprimanded sees the teacher standing on her chair, eating her lunch in her classroom alone. And the kid comes in, and she's like, why are you sitting on your chair like that? And the teacher gets mad at her, and she's like, you can't say that to me. And so it's kind of like a hierarchy of that. And whoever is in power is the one deciding what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. And that's kind of what I got out of it, because it's interesting in the story. At first, you feel very, very sorry for Joseph K. And you're like, why? He hasn't done anything wrong. Why would they even arrest him? And as the story goes on and he does more awkward things, you're just like, you start to feel apathetic for him. And then by the end, you're like, yeah, he can go. I don't really like this character anymore. And so it kind of goes along like that. And this happens so many times in life. And I like I've said, I've noticed it in groups of girls a lot. And I've always wondered, how do we get out of that cycle? And that also brings in the parable Before the Law, which I want to redo, because the first time I read Before the Law, I hadn't gotten through the trial, and once I did get through the trial, I was like, okay, I want to change my interpretation. But say you want to just define your own life, and you're like, I don't care what other people say. And you're like the girl who's standing on the chair, and she's like, I'm just going to stand on the chair anyway. And so you first get past through that group of girls. The group of girls are like the first door, and you're like, I don't care what they say. But then you're faced with a teacher, and she has authority. And can you really say, like, I don't care what she says? Because then you get reprimanded for it, and so on and so on and so on, because you get sent to the principal's office, and it's like, how long are you going to stand on the chair? How many times are you going to go through the door? It's going to get harder and harder and harder, and you don't know how hard it's going to get until you're past not caring what other people think. Sorry, that was a lot in one spiel.
No, I think the classroom analogy is a good one, and I don't know if I'd necessarily limit it to just the feminine experience, because I think this is how the fiction of Kafka gets beyond anything like blankly ideological, which says, oh, this person's the oppressor and this person's the oppressed, right? Because I think, and this is really interesting to me, because, you know, Kafka was born 30 years after Freud, and they had very similar backgrounds. And in a way, they cover the same topics, but from different lenses, right? Freud's trying to make it scientific, factual, and Kafka kind of covers the same topics from a fictional lens. I feel like in combination, you kind of get this really powerful analysis, which, like I said, goes way beyond any sort of blank ideology. Two things spring to mind in your example is that schools are a very interesting environment, and I say that because your example's good about, you know, someone not being aware of what the game of being behaved or whatever that means is, you know, because I had a very similar experiences where, you know, you have your home environment, and then maybe you have the children on your street who you are social with, and there's like there's obviously certain rules to that, but then all of a sudden you're brought into this involuntary structured environment with very clear hierarchies. And like you said, I think for a lot of children, it's not always obvious, very, very much like the case of, you know, Joseph K, which they don't really know what they're doing wrong most of the time. And it's, you know, it's that learning process. But without getting too like political, I do think that the word kind of Kafkaesque, I think it goes beyond the word, you know, of oppression and oppressor, because it's a very specific type of socialization and power structure. And I think that the Kafkaesque like kind of oppression is way more likely to happen when there is an involuntary power structure. That way, like you said, people who have the power want to keep hold of it. That power is not as well. It's not as well justified. It's kind of just arbitrarily given in a way. And in that way, it kind of lends itself to, I guess I would say, kind of the worst of humanity, which is, you know, the kind of lying, weird manipulation that happens when people have that sort of arbitrary control.
Yeah, and I would say, I think when you get closer to the top, you know you're in control. But when you're kind of at the bottom, so like the students against the other student, you don't really know that you have the power. It's kind of hidden at first until you get up to like where you're the teacher. And so I just thought of that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that comes out in Kafka as well, especially in the trial. I'm trying to remember the specific scene. I think he's when he's in the weird loft space with all the legal people, and they're sort of ganging up on him at first, but then I guess, for lack of a better word, like a bigger fish comes along and starts whipping like the smaller lawmakers or something. The weird, bizarre, like Kafka fashion. But that happens. That definitely happens with children a lot because you know. From week to week, there's like a different alpha in a way, and it's because especially I think when those involuntary power structures are unstable in the way they are with younger people, I think it lends itself to that weird Kafkaesque. You don't really know where you stand with people, and 1 second you could be the alpha, the next you're being whipped on the ground.
Yes, and it also makes me think of the scene where he goes to see the priest, and the priest is like, "Don't you know what you've done?" And he's like, "No, I don't know what I've done." And I use that in my interpretation of, "Don't you know what you've done?" And I use the example of how maybe you're not doing anything morally wrong, but according to those in power, you are doing something that is unacceptable to them. And it may be something that they're doing, but you can't do it, because if you do it, then you'll be at the same standing they are.
Mm-hmm. I suppose there's a weird, and I guess this is kind of like a Freudian point as well, is that I do think that the trial is ultimately about conscience, and that's whether conscience is sort of a misunderstood like sense of guilt that you have, or whether conscience is like that you've done bad things because you could maybe get away with it or something. And this is something that you kind of teased out of the story for me that I didn't really think before, which was like, you see the frustration that Kay is going through, and you kind of sympathize from that angle. But then when he kind of gets the chance, he does actually do a few like weird or like not very good things.
Yeah, like when he goes and visits his lawyer, and then he goes and sleeps with the maid. Like just randomly while they're going over his trial. I was like, that's not technically morally wrong, but it's like, why would you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is kind of where it comes into the, like you said, like kind of thinking about this in a more feminine way, because there are like those weird neuroses that come out in Kafka. Because I think that the metamorph, and this is so unintentional, because like like I said, Freud and Kafka were around at the same time, and it's like it's not like Freud was completely well established when he was writing these. And it's so interesting how like the familial neuroses that Freud would be talking about are reflected in the metamorphosis, and then you have these sort of sexual neuroses coming up in the trial as well.
Yeah, and I believe in the trial it happened 3 times.
Yeah.
Right. And the first time you're just like, oh, that was weird. And then the second time I was like, what are you doing? And then the third time it's like, oh, okay, here we go again. And then it's almost like the third time you're just like, okay, I'm defining this person now. I'm like, that's just who that person is. That person is just weird.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it also shows how our minds will be open at first and then gradually begin to close the more we're exposed to and the more we see. Because as children, we just kind of run around and do our own thing, and we aren't really thinking about rules or laws or anything. And we're taught a lot of unspoken rules by our environment. And so gradually, as we get older and older, we start to become closed-minded and lose that childlike sense of wonder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess it's kind of, I don't know, like, would you say that Kafka is, I would say he's definitely like a more adult writer.
Mm-hmm.
He sort of feels, I mean, yeah, we don't know the guy, right? But he kind of feels like someone who's lost their sense of wonder with the world. Like they're very pessimistic bits of writing.
Yeah, but I also think it's almost like, in a way that the writing is not the content of the writing, but the surrealness of it seems childlike.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very imaginative, like almost like he's trying to grab that childlikeness back, and he's reaching for it, and he's wanting to go back in time and feel that way again. And he's like, I don't know how I can. I'm just stuck in this prison. Actually, one interpretation I really loved doing was on the trees, and that was a very small story. I think it was only a couple sentences long, but it was talking about how a tree can be both sturdy, but at the same time it will, or like it's perceived as sturdy, but at the same time when like a gust of wind comes, it just kind of falls over. And sorry, I like kind of like moving in a different topic here, but it we were talking and it made me think of it. When I think what also plays in the game of that trial is security, and kind of an illusion of security. So I've noticed that humans will, based on the story, humans will have more security if there is an illusion of security. So we will buy the nice houses and the nice cars, and we'll get the good jobs, and that will lead us to a better group of friends who will um, take care of us in a sense, and like bring us into their friends group, and create more security for us. And so that's like humans to humans. But when you put a human up against nature, then there really is no security at all. It was all just an illusion. So say like you live in a big house, but a tornado comes by and it just completely demolishes the house. The security was never there. It's just like before the law, um, you were the only one there, or you were the only one who could tell you that you could go through the door or not. But you chose not to. You There's an illusion of security, and we tell ourselves we're secure, but we really aren't. It's all it's almost like there's an he speaks to an underlying nature of things, that humans try um, to cover up, but it always becomes revealed. Does that, I don't know if I articulated that quite the way I wanted to, but does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, completely. I would add on to that actually it's not just that humans feel the need to do that. I feel like in most cases, I think that humans kind of have to do that to survive, right? Because
Yeah.
if you think about it, like nature is so unwieldy and so much more powerful than us than we know, and
Mhm.
to go beyond that, like so is whoever's holding the weapons in government at the moment, right? Like it's beyond one person like myself or like you. Like it's kind of unbelievable that we're not just in a total state of panic all the time. And I suppose that's kind of, to get back to the psychological stuff, that's kind of what you see when someone's really highly neurotic, like and it's weird how that the weird neuroses, even when someone's really neurotic, they're, again, like, because we're humans and we have there's just unlimited information around us. Like when I've been talking to you here, I'm kind of, I'm kind of aware of maybe my notes, but I'm not really aware of something in my room. Like behind me, like one of the chairs could move or something, and I probably wouldn't even notice it. And it's weird how, like, even when someone's really neurotic, that they can barely even leave their flat, like where their cutlery is placed in the drawer is really important to them, and all this sort of
Mhm.
stuff. It's just a really weird thing. And I think in the opening scene of the trial, Kay lives in some sort of weird rented accommodation or whatever, anything, but it's like, it's not like he really hears a knock at the door and then he answers it and they say, "Oh, you're under arrest." Like they're already like in his like living space when he's up, he's like still kind of half asleep. And that's kind of what it's like when you're in a sense of catastrophe. Like it's not like the cat, like it's not like the wolf is waiting at the door. It's not like the catastrophe is waiting at the door. By the time you've noticed the catastrophe's there, it's already too late. They're in your front room, you know.
Yes, and I would say the the powers above him, the authoritative powers above him, almost seem like nature, because he can never surpass them. They're already there, like you said. The Once you realize that you have been living in an illusion, it's already too late. Like your house is already blown down by the winds. The people are already in your room ready to arrest you, and there's nothing you can really do about it. And that also makes me think of I don't know, have you read The Hunger Artist?
No, I haven't. I have not read that one. No.
Okay, so basically, it's a story about an artist who starves himself, and and this is like an art, and people like come and watch it, and then in a later time, people start to get bored of him, and it's kind of like a dying art, and they bring a panther in who also starves, and the panther just kind of is. The panther doesn't really think, and so the panther kind of is that force of nature that we were talking about, and people are all like mesmerized by the panther because the panther doesn't really think about what he's doing. He just does it. And people are like, oh, wow, that's amazing. That's like beyond what we can comprehend. And the hunger artist is like still trying to catch up with the panther. Like he's like, I can starve myself for this many days. Like, look at me. And people are just kind of like, and what's interesting about human nature is that even though we know we cannot surpass nature, part of us wants to still continue to try and surpass it, even though we know we will never do it. And I've always found that interesting, that like you or I, even though we know we will not know everything there is to know about philosophy or psychology, we still try to learn everything we can. And I just think that's so interesting.
I think that there is that kind of, arbitrary nature to everything in a sense, because nature can take things all away at once. And people look at it in the same way with religion as well, because they say God works in mysterious ways, or God can kind of just take everything away like arbitrarily. But also it kind of speaks to the fact that humans are in every sense, I think, like limited beings. Like they're like it's like when you go to a really well stocked library or something, if you really think about it, it's kind of overwhelming to look at all the books and just imagine how much time it would take you to read those books. Because if you go to a really well stocked library, like you could spend the rest of your life in there and you wouldn't be able to read everything. But in a sense, the fact that we're limited actually makes life kind of worth living. And this is something I've written about in my books before. But my kind of theory is that, at least to the way humans think, being immortal or being kind of completely unbounded in that sense would be like drastically inhuman. And if you were a human intellect stuck within that sort of paradigm, I feel like it would be almost like a torture, because it would be like immortality is just like, there's like, the only reason it's worth us having this conversation now is because, well, there's going to be a day when we can't have this conversation, right? Or the only reason why it's worth me writing something is because, well, one day I'm not going to be able to write anything more, right? Like there's something kind of, like you said, with that whole letting go and Gregor's sister in the Metamorphosis, the fact that we have to have that moment of letting go at the end kind of makes everything we do now like really important in a way.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what she did. She let go, and And so I read all of these stories, and it made me think of well, how would we even or surpass things if we are limited as humans? And it made me think, well, maybe if we are limited and we are able to see the limit, we can think in a different way. Well, maybe like non-rationally, to break out of this system and expand ourselves. Maybe we will never get to nature, but there is a way that we could, like the sister, go one more day where we can care for Gregor and keep improving that way. There was actually another story I read called Little Fable. And it's a very small story again. I love the small stories he writes because he just packs so much into them, into like one paragraph. But it's a mouse running in I think it was a maze, and then the walls keep getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And at the end, there's a trap, and there's a cat next to the trap, and because the mouse is like, well, what do I do? There's a trap here. It's the end. And the cat says, well, you just need to change your direction. And the cat eats the mouse. And instead of it looking at it at a surface level, like the cat was something like that was to be opposed to the mouse, I looked at it like, well, maybe to reach our limits and surpass our potential that we have right now, maybe to get to the next door, like in Before the Law, we need to kill off irrational thinking and start thinking non-rationally, to find new ways of doing things and better ways of being human, or better ways of doing things and being humans, and so that we could take care of our family members for much longer, and we could, like I mentioned before, how women will have doctors, women who are diagnosed with like cancer or disease will have doctors who tell them to prepare to be alone. Well, maybe this will help. This non-rational thinking will help save marriages in the future. So that's just what I thought of with that.
Yeah, and I suppose we've already mentioned kind of the Western world, whatever that means these days, and the way that's changed. And I do think a lot of it is down to the Enlightenment and, you know, the rational or so-called rational thinking that comes out of that. And I feel like, you know, like I said, the rational ways of looking at the world, like materialism and empiricism, have their power, right? They have an incredible power, but there's obviously something that they take away as well, because they also they get because of the fact that humans build structures that inevitably become corrupt. Doesn't matter how rationally you're thinking, because at the end of the day, there are going to be unforeseens that you don't know, or, you know, even just regular old human laziness or malevolence, like we've already talked about. And these things eventually become corrupt in a way where, yeah, it's perfectly rational to be like, oh, society's getting better if GDP is going up. But there are like non-rational or ways that don't fit into the way that you measure in your rationality, that society is getting worse.
Absolutely. And I think the sister in the Metamorphosis is a really great example, because I think the father would be on the spectrum where he'd be like very rational, like, my son is a bug. We got to get rid of him. He's a bug. Like, this is not my son anymore.
Well, to a rational mind, like, that's no longer your son, right?
Right.
But to like an emotive way of thinking, like to a rational mind, there is a bug in my son's room and my son has now disappeared. To the like irrational mind, my brother is now a bug. I don't know. It's very strange that I didn't think about that.
Where the sister thinks very non-rationally, where she's like, you know what? My brother is a bug now. he's very strange looking now, but I'm gonna take care of him still. Like, I'm gonna throw him some food. And the mom and the father are just like, why would you do that? And in that way, and that's why I think we kind of look at those non-rational ideas as very funny, because we're like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. That's not logical.
But yeah, that's so just to kind of tie that up a little bit, is like from necessity, unconditional love can't be for rational reasons, because those would be conditional reasons.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that's getting too like analytical about it, but I think that kind of makes it make sense to me. I don't know, just kind of rewinding, because I do think a lot of Kafka's work is about conscience, and you sort of raised the fact that, we've sort of brought out the fact that Kay does a lot of weird stuff in the trial. And in a sense, the reason why the whole you're being accused of something, even though in a lot of ways it doesn't really like impact his life very much in a way, like there's just a bit of annoyance basically. But I guess the main anxiety of the novel is from, and at least this is I think it's a fair reading, is that he kind of knows in a sense that he's not a good person, and there's likely something that he's done that he's rightly going to be executed for. Spoiler alert! I didn't mean to say that. But do you think that everyone has a conscience?
I think so. Yeah. No. I say that everyone has a conscience, but some people are more aware of it than other people. That's what I think. It kind of like the example I gave with the school children and the teacher. The teacher would be more aware of it than the school children would be. Yeah.
I also think that on top of that, I feel like conscience has a lot to do with temperament as well. I think that people's temperaments can make them think that some things are more important than others. Like I guess a more rational, analytic mind would, feel guilt if they did something not by the book, and maybe someone who's a more emotionally minded might feel really bad if they did something that was against their values in some way.
Yes, I could definitely see that as well. And I think those professions like teacher, police officer, doctor, it kind of falls into the more by the book, and where a lot of those professions actually need that emotional aspect of it as well. Because if you only go by the book, then a lot of oppression actually ends up happening. Not to get too political as well, but you need the emotional aspect of that as well when you're in those positions of power.
So if you were accused of something and you weren't allowed to know what it was, tapping into your conscience, what's the first thing that springs to your mind that you might have done?
I love these questions. I don't even know. I live pretty by the book. Like, maybe probably like accidentally said something embarrassing or weird. That would probably be it. Like a lot of the time I will accidentally like just say what's on my mind.
Yeah.
And then I pay for it later, because I'm a very upfront person, and I expect other people to be upfront, and they're like, no, we're not like that. So, like so I live in the Midwest, and the Midwesterners are very like beat around the bush. Like if they want to tell you something, they're going to tell you in a very like light, very nice way. Like maybe you shouldn't act like that. Maybe we should do this instead. Where I'm more like, why are you doing that? Like, so I think that would probably be the one thing I'd be accused of in the Midwest. They'd be like, no, that's not Midwestern. Don't do that.
Yeah, being from England, I can relate to that. It's a very very sort of, I don't know, it's almost like it's its own language. Like when an English person is telling you something, but they're not saying what they actually are saying, but another English person will know what they're saying, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Which is very funny if you talk to someone from the continent. If you ask them how they're doing, unlike from someone from the Anglo world, like American or English person, they will actually tell you how they're doing. They'll be like, "Oh, I'm really bad. My grandma just died," for example.
Yeah, where in the Midwest they'll be like, "Oh, I'm doing good. Everything's good. How are you? Oh, good." And it's never not good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the short Kafka stories that I hadn't read before, but your sort of reading on it definitely prompted me to read it, was a country doctor, and I think there's lots of really interesting things about that short story, which it's not long at all, but so many like weird, strange things, and it's definitely one of the more fantastical and in a way like childlike of Kafka's stories. If you wouldn't mind, could you kind of give us your general reading of it?
Yes. Oh, okay. So this was actually the hardest interpretation that I did. And I actually had to do 2 videos of it, because the first time I was like, I don't know, I think it's about this. But then the second time I was like, okay, I think it's about this. And the reason why it was so difficult was because it was very much like the trial. Very, very surreal. Lots of elements to it. But this one was, I thought it was even more difficult than the trial, because it was packed into like 9 pages, just a whole bunch of stuff. And so basically what I came up with was the realization that our life has become a ruin because our complacency. And it all began with neglecting a horse. So in the beginning, he kind of neglects his horse, and then all of a sudden this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and his life kind of falls apart eventually. I think in life, we as humans, we look at people of authority, like doctors, and we put them on a pedestal because they are because they have done the work, they have done the research, they have spent years in school. So we're like, they know what they're talking about. But what happens is in life, because we're very human, we can tend to be complacent and get relaxed in where we are. So a doctor could spend 20 years researching and be like, you know what? I think that's enough. I know I know all there is to know about this field. So I'm going to relax a little bit. But what happens when that doctor relaxes? Because nature evolves, and you've got viruses and different sicknesses that are evolving, you need to do more research. And if the doctor isn't doing more research, well, more people are going to get worse under their care, because they now don't know what this new strand of virus is. And so how I looked at it was the after effect of what complacency does.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? I also put in my notes, this story had to be surreal, because in real life, our complacency also puts us in places that we never thought we would ever be. And this also goes for things like relationships. If you there's a saying where they say, like, you should never put your marriage in autopilot, because if you put it on autopilot, then everything will eventually crumble. And so it's very much the same idea as the doctor. If you're going to hold something to a certain standard, you can never be complacent about it, and you have to continue being kind of like the hunger artist and chasing after nature, and trying to gain all the information and be the best that you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, it sort of brought out the fact that authority, and I guess in this case, the authority of the doctor, authority is kind of like a sort of magic. Like they treat him when he's coming to, tend to this sick man, almost as if he's going to come along and do like a shaman like magic trick, and he's going to feel better or something like this. And again, thinking back to the whole school thing, is that we almost treat teachers in the same way when we're younger as well. There's sort of a funny anecdote. I know like several people that thought that the teachers like lived in the school, like
I thought that when I was younger, and you would see them in the market and be like, "Why are you here?"
Yeah, like they hang from the ceilings of the classrooms like bats or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do look on it in like a sort of magic, right? And I suppose one thing that kind of is actually quite a useful tool against, the mystical ways in which we look at authority is you have to remember that even like the most powerful people in the world, they've had to deal with the same fallible aspects of our humanity that you have. Like they've probably been very ill at times in their life. They've probably broken a bone and had to have a cast and been in immense pain. They've had the thing about, like you were saying, like complacency. They've probably, ignored the warning light on their car for so long, and then all of a sudden they're surprised that the car doesn't work and all their plans fall apart, for example. That's kind of what I took from it.
Yeah, and there was also something else in my interpretation that you just mentioned. We almost, as people who aren't doctors, we have to take care of the doctor by taking care of ourselves. Because if we're not taking care of ourselves, and because the doctor is human, what happens if the doctor gets sick? Then we have no doctor. And actually, this goes into the Pinot Colony that I read, and that was one of my favorite readings. And this complacency kind of plays into the idea of when a society doesn't want to leave its archaic ways because it's become so complacent. And so I think of things like labor, or women in labor in America, and how high the maternal mortality rate is. And and the labor experience for mothers in America is very, very difficult. And it's really not any one person's fault, but really the result of complacency. And how now we have a shortage of doctors and nurses, so women can't get the proper care that they need. And and because they can't get that proper care that we need, it's almost like a vicious cycle that you keep going into. And there was one other aspect to it. So there are better ways of doing things, but not everybody wants to do it because they're just so tired because of the ruins of the complacency. And so I often think about, well, how do we get out of that, but with non-rational thinking again?
Yeah, because I suppose the rational systems, and I maybe this is true of the US, but I don't know. But I'm guessing that as availability of those sorts of services falls, naturally so does demand, because people no longer ask for those services. And I suppose it's not. I think it's probably the same for lots of physical ailments, because if people notice something that could lead to something else like cancer, or someone's like, oh, my teeth aren't looking great, maybe I just gotta get them checked out, but they don't do it, then it leads to like a worse problem further down the line. That's something that, again, like coming back to the rationality and materialism, is that actually that's one of the strengths that has, is that kind of in a sense pulled us out of the brutality, the absolute brutality of like non-medicalized childbirth, the absolute brutality of just not knowing how to look after yourself in any way. And yeah, it's strange. I'm not really sure what the solution is there. What sort of like emotional thinking do you think will get us out of that situation?
Oh gosh.
Maybe I should say emotive thinking. Not emotive thinking.
Oh well, I definitely don't know. I don't
Come on,
know
what's
how
the
to say
manifesto? Come
but
on.
what?
We need to sort this out tonight. What's the
We
manifesto?
do need to sort this out tonight. I personally, I don't know what I would do, but I think especially for women in labor, we need to introduce different ways of doing things, and like different avenues. Like a lot of people are doing home births and natural births now, like at different centers instead of the hospitals. The only problem with that is it's super expensive to do, and so it's like, well, we could pay a lot of money to do this and leave our archaic ways, and we could do it, but then we also have to sacrifice something else, and it's like, what do we sacrifice? And like I said, it's a whole cycle. How do we even get past that? But with I like, going off the top of my head, I don't even know if I could think non-rationally about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose, and this is something that somewhat a bit like, I'm not a father, so I'm not familiar with the experience, but it's very strange how almost everyone who I know who has become a parent, and I was hoping that you as a mother could chime in on this, is that it doesn't matter how like cerebral of a person you are, you inevitably get non-rational about it. You inevitably enter that, we would say in philosophy, like the deontological space, which is kind of, in a technical way, saying kind of like that non-conditional action, that non-conditional love.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me, at least, like from the outside, it seems like becoming a parent is like a weird biological hack, which is a shortcut to that kind of love, and also that kind of meaning.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you brought up a really important point about unconditional love. Maybe the question is, how do we move society as a whole to that place of unconditional love for these different problems that we have, so that we can move out of this vicious cycle? It's not Kafka, but Dostoevsky also touches on this in Crime and Punishment as well.
Mhm.
And so, and to do that unconditional love, it makes me think, what would it take to move people to that position?
Mhm.
What would it take to make everybody the sister of Gregor?
Well, and this is something I think I mentioned earlier on the conversation, is that unconditional love is a beautiful thing, but because we're bounded creatures, it actually has to be limited. We can't like unconditionally have love for everyone on the planet, because we've got limited, like you said, we've got limited resources. We talked about the amount of money it would cost for someone to have the perfect birth and all this sort of stuff, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really like an interesting tension that we're not going to escape as human beings. So I almost feel like we need to find the fallen solution to the problems, as opposed to the ideal solution to the problems. But
Yeah.
that's me as a pragmatist speaking, I think.
Oh, no, I completely understand what you're saying. And like, what I'm saying is a very what's the word for it? It's a very like hopeful way of doing things.
Yeah.
Where yours is more like realistic, I would say. So maybe like we were talking about the like the teachers and the doctors and the police officers, like, you need that limit of the law, like by the book, but you also have to be flexible with that emotional aspect to it. So
Yeah.
maybe just finding a balance between both would be a really, really good way of going about things. Now, of course, we don't know because we haven't really tried it yet, but I feel like that maybe that balance would be more ideal.
Yeah. There's obviously, I think with most things there's a happy medium with these things, or a happy 3/4 this way and a happy quarter that way. But someone who I really was really influential on me is Viktor Frankl, and he talks about his like the search for meaning in terms of like it's called logotherapy, and it's basically combining psychoanalysis with the kind of search for meaning, and that as a guiding principle in the sense that it transcends things, because meaning can be found in traditional religion, meaning can be found in modern technology, like meaning can be found in a family, for example. And I think it's important because, again, this is the issue with thinking that doctors are magical, or scientific authorities should just be blindly trusted, and then this comes back to your childhood, is that the fact that as an adult you shouldn't blindly trust authorities is the same reason why you shouldn't blindly trust a teacher when you're younger, and it's weird because for some reason we seem to go to those modern rationalistic and in a sense arbitrary, because they're non-consensual authorities, when in the past we would have gone to family members or maybe a spiritual leader instead. And I'm not saying you should get the witch doctor instead of the actual doctor, but there's something in the middle. There's some way we can meet in the middle between the rational and the emotional, I think.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with that, because I think, and again, not to get too political, but I see that we're either going like all the way over here or all the way over here, and it's like, let's pull the both sides back to happy middle.
Yeah, I think I know. I think I might guess the answer to this, but do you think we get closer to the truth through facts or through fiction?
I think through fiction. I think the facts are a good base. They're a good base or a point of departure to have. But fiction allows us to surpass limits that we put onto ourselves.
Yeah. So it's difficult to say, because I mean, for me, the Trial is like, it would be in my like top 5 books of all time, and I know that I read it like when I was like 17 years old, so I read it a long time ago, and it had a huge influence on me then. And every time I go back to it, I get something new from it. I could listen to like analysis of it online on YouTube endlessly, because I get every time. But I'm just kind of wondering, like, of Kafka's corpus, what's like a standout highlight to you? And I'm also kind of just wondering, in like I said, like, okay, The Trial is one of my top 5, but kind of like what are the other like major influences on you?
I would say definitely Metamorphosis, because I have so many. I don't know why, but I have a lot of people who come up to me and tell me their stories and their stories on care, and what has happened in their life, and how they're kind of thought of as bugs now, and so that had a real big impact on me. Metamorphosis did. Also in the Pinot Colony, mostly because I had a particularly difficult labor both times. And also I read like 10 or 12 of his works. A Dream, which we didn't talk about, but basically how I interpreted it was acknowledging death's presence, and life kind of, we go through life in an illusion, not thinking about death, and then all of a sudden death is there. And we have to acknowledge it, and then we also have to go back to our life and go back to that illusion, because we can't hold death. And then there was also one more. I really like Up in the Gallery, and it's 2 sentences, but it was, I think personally, was one of his most beautiful works. And I looked at it in a very feminine lens. It was talking about how you go to, or there's a gallery, And there's like this woman. It's almost like a circus, and there's this woman putting on this performance, and everybody's cheering, and she thinks it's such a great performance, and everybody loves her and looks at her for like her talent. But the person who's sitting up in the gallery is like, this is not this way. What it's really like is she's being controlled by the ringmaster, and she's having to do all of this, and they look at her in an entirely different way that she thinks. And I interpret it as soon as like a man lusts after a woman, she's kind of stuck in a performance for him, kind of like she's like stuck in a music box. And he doesn't want to leave the gallery because he benefits from it, but he cries because he knows that it's hurting her. And so that was one of my favorite pieces of work, and I think it was one of his most beautiful ones. And I don't know what his meaning he had for it was, but I think that's also the beauty of Kafka, is that he writes in these beautiful, surreal like places and sceneries that like he sets up these sceneries that are very different than everyday life. And so you may get an entirely different interpretation based on your life than I do. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. I that is why Kafka is one of my favorite authors of all time. And I wish I could have met him in real life. I wish we could make a time machine and I could go back and be like, hi, I'm such a huge fan.
I don't know. I think don't meet your heroes. That's what I say.
Yeah.
We might be really disappointed. I don't know.
He'd probably be like, oh, leave me alone. I don't want to talk to you.
That's a really good place to tie it up, I think. Thank you, Sam. Greener Side of Sam on YouTube. Loads of like really good analysis. It's particularly the Kafka ones for me, but there's loads of good stuff on your channel. When I talk to someone new, I kind of like to wrap it up with a tongue-in-cheek question, because these conversations get really serious sometimes, and sometimes it's good to have a bit of fun. But let's imagine you were Kay, and the trial's over and you're going to be executed, but you get one last meal. What would your last meal be?
Oh, sushi and pistachio, strawberry, and chocolate macaroons on the side, with a matcha latte with a shot of vanilla. That's what I would eat.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you for having me.